Indiana Jones has seen a lot of things in his day. Although his original trilogy of cinematic adventures, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade, all happened in the same decade, the 1930s. This was a period of time when film serials were popular, the kind of film serials George Lucas and Steven Spielberg would later watch as kids, and that they would try to emulate with Raiders of the Lost Ark.
I just really expressed to George my desire to, make a movie that I had been raised on, the kind of film that really had attracted, my attention as a kid growing up, which was these spectacular international adventure stories that were mainly represented by these very cheaply made, low-budget black and white Republic serials.
The Saturday movie matinee with its serialized cliffhanger was part of a way of life. Working together, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg have recreated the excitement of the classic cliffhanger.
There is an atmosphere to this movie not unlike a lot of old movies.
Throwback to an older kind of film. It's a high adventure, vaguely in the mode of the old Saturday morning serials.
George Lucas and Steven Spielberg joining forces for the first time to pay homage to the Saturday action matinee.
In the essay, The Serials, an introduction, for the Images Journal, Gary Johnson describes the protagonists of these films as courageous heroes who valiantly struggled for justice, loyalty, and the American way. The serials were often simple fare for simple times, and their morality and philosophy reflected that. But times change. The last of the once popular serials, Blazing the Overland Trail, was released in 1956, the year before the action of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Indy rides off into the nostalgia-tinged sunset of the Saturday matinee serials in 1989, and when he's finally pulled out of the trunk of cinema in 2008, he finds himself blinking into a colder, more modern, post-serial landscape. A world that is perhaps
not as easy as it used to be.
Whereas the original trilogy, as Dial of Destiny director James Mangold said, all easily fit with the serialized, theatrical, almost screwball action style of movies that were being released in the period they're set in, the latter movies ask how Indiana Jones moves forward into new decades, where the world is no longer seen in such clear demarcations of black and white and good and evil. Instead of the hazy, nostalgic past, these stories more closely resemble our own world. Mangold goes so far as to say that the 1969 setting of Dial of Destiny is the beginning of now, really, in terms of technology and the space race. So you have Cold Wars, nuclear power, intrigue, the lack of clear good guys and bad guys. You have to be really considerate about how you try and transpose a fairly simplistic kind of black hat, white hat sensibility into a period that is more complicated. Gun-wielding, whip-swinging, cliff-hanging archaeologist Indiana Jones is a pulp hero from a black and white world who wonders if he still has a place in a world that's gone gray. And that begins in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. As Indy moves out of his cinematic comfort zone and toward the modern era, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull challenges what the Indiana Jones franchise was and what it could be. The archaeologist becomes a philosopher.
Dr. Tyree's philosophy class is right down the hall.
As, amid an increasingly divided and unfamiliar world, Indy finds himself searching for the key to unlocking the dream of a new tomorrow.
To lay their just hands on that golden key that opens the palace of eternity.
Indiana Jones is episodic. Each film itself is its own unique reality.
Writer and producer George Lucas, who initially conceived of Indiana Jones, sought to have each of the Indiana Jones films be their own separate adventures in almost their own separate worlds. Totally disparate adventures of this singular archaeologist. And in this way, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull shares a certain kinship with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. In contrast to Last Crusade and Raiders of the Lost Ark, which visit similar locales, offer similar enemies, and feature familiar faces, Temple of Doom and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull find ways to distance themselves from the setting, tone, and topics of these films. Similar to the way Temple of Doom takes on more overtly dark and gruesome tones and imagery as it embraces more of the horror thriller genre, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull explores its newfound time period by incorporating a new genre as well, as this time, Indy finds himself in a classic science fiction B-movie of the alien invader,
Saucermen from Mars
variety.
It was the idea of taking the genre from the 1930s serials, action-adventure serials, to the B science fiction movies of the 50s, in the early 50s. That would be the cinematic equivalent, and I wanted to rest it on a cinematic antecedent like we did with the other one.
Like the serial adventures of the 30s and 40s, the sci-fi B-movie was popular during the 1950s, the time period of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. In a similar vein as the serials, sci-fi B-movies were largely low-cost films, still with simple stories in their own way, focusing on thrills and chills. But unlike the serials, the genre was fraught with themes indicative of murkier times. While not necessarily explicit in the stories, themes of paranoia, invasion, and fears of the world-ending atomic bomb seeped intentionally or otherwise into the science fiction B-movie. As Bill Warren describes in his preface to Keep Watching the Skies, American science fiction movies in the 50s, the first A-bombs introduced the world to the deadly mushroom cloud, a hallmark of nuclear explosions from then on. Radiation became an all-purpose monster-making or reviving tool for makers of characteristic 1950s science fiction movies. The word atomic, previously used mostly by physicists and chemists, seeped into the language of everyday life. The war also introduced the terror strategy of targeting cities and other civilian population centers, even those without military or industrial importance. In the science fiction films, this escalated to a fear of destroying the entire world, heretofore not possible.
It'll be like those 1950s B movies, Earth versus Flying Saucers, and all those exploitation movies that were really about government paranoia, Cold War fears and things like that, and Hollywood turned them into invaders from Mars.
The shift in genre influence may make Kingdom somewhat incongruous when comparing it to the original trilogy of 30s set indie adventures, disconnecting our hero from his natural storytelling environment and making this new and unfamiliar reality and its concerns all the more pronounced by contrast. In keeping with the paranoia of the era, the film continuously reinforces the deceptiveness and lack of clarity of good and evil. The film immediately establishes this recurring motif with the immortal words of Elvis, telling us we've been lied to, and our friends aren't what they seem. Further context is quickly provided as we're introduced to a convoy of American soldiers who are revealed to be Russian soldiers in disguise, slaughtering American soldiers. Indy's own close friend, George McHale, Mac, who we're told he's been through a lot with,
I thought we were friends, Mac.
turns on Indy.
Well, what can I say, Jonesy? I'm a capitalist. And they pay.
And reveals to have allied himself with the enemy for his own selfish purposes. After being kidnapped by the Soviets, Indy even finds himself in the strange position of aiding them to their goal. But still, Indy confidently states his side in this conflict and, like the classic adventure serial protagonist he is, places his morality in a sense of good old-fashioned American patriotism by defiantly declaring,
"I like Ike."
the same phrase that is tauntingly written on a doomsday weapon created by his own side that Indy soon finds hanging over his head, threatening him and the antagonists of the story equally, even threatening him to a greater extent than they threaten him.
You're great, don't wait for me!
Indy thinks he finds safety and allies, but it's not what it seems. Nothing is what it seems. Everything is very, very volatile and very, very dangerous. Indy's forced to hide in a refrigerator, despite those things being
death traps.
Talk about a Cold War. The destructive power Indy's side wields is not lost on those threatened by it. Indy's main adversary, Irina Spalko, will later recite the words of the bomb's most prominent architect, J. Robert Oppenheimer.
"Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds,"
which Indy identifies as a method of self-reflection.
He was quoting the Hindu Bible.
But Spalko insists she interprets the words as a threat.
It was nuclear intimidation.
A threat which, ultimately, could escalate to threaten the entire world. Upon escaping the Russians and returning to the safety provided by the US of A, Indy speaks with some government agents and recounts a story in which he and some 20 other people were all but kidnapped by the American government, placed into buses with blacked-out windows, and taken to examine the site of a wreckage.
You mean that Air Force fiasco on 47?
But kept in the dark about the event and threatened with treason if they were to ever speak of it. The paranoia is evident as Indy is immediately placed under suspicion as a result of his association with the traitorous Mac.
Frankly, your association with George McHale makes all your activities suspicious, including those during the war.
And as a result of his kidnapping. Well, not the kidnapping perpetrated by the US government to help them with their top-secret project.
You mean that Air Force fiasco on 47?
The kidnapping perpetrated by Spalko to help her and the Russian government with their top-secret project.
You aided and abetted KGB agents who broke into a top-secret military installation in the middle of the United States of America.
Not everyone in the Army's a commie, and certainly not Indy. Do you have any idea how many medals this son of a bitch won?
Great many, I'm sure. But does he deserve them?
After his years of dedication and service to his country,
all those years we spent spying on the Reds.
He was MI6 when I was in OSS. We did 30 missions together in Europe and the Pacific.
Indy becomes frustrated by the gray uncertainty and rampant suspicion when defending his allegiance to someone proclaiming the US to be
my country,
and angrily highlights the lack of clarity between the sides of right and wrong, good and evil, with a joke.
Don't wave your war record in our face, Colonel Jones. We all served.
No kidding. What side were you on?
Indy soon finds it's no joke, as his blacklisting by the government has cost him his job at Marshall College.
What?
The FBI showed up this morning, ransacked your office, searched all your files.
Caught in the crossfire, Indy's friend and dean of the college, Charles Stanforth, resigns in order to secure Indy's continued compensation.
What exactly did you have to go through, Charlie?
Henry, I resigned.
Even as Indy apologizes for momentarily doubting Stanforth's loyalty to him through the ordeal.
I never should have doubted you, my friend.
Stanforth returns that...
No. You have reason to question your friends these days.
He goes on to blame the American government for stoking unnecessary amounts of fear, turning people, even friends, against each other, saying,
I barely recognize this country anymore. The government's got us seeing communists in our soup. When the hysteria reaches academia, I guess it's time to call it a career.
Stanforth's words seem to reflect Indy's position as well.
I barely recognize this country anymore.
Indy finds he can't tell whether the thuggish ghouls trailing them are with the FBI or KGB. Either seems equally likely. And Mac continues flip-flopping sides 3 or 4 more times throughout the movie. Even Indiana, again, finds himself in the odd circumstance of helping Spalko and her army toward their goal. And at times, very nearly seems to have a genuine interest and excitement in this partnership.
Here, sono. The Portuguese word for sleep.
Yes, good. Exactly.
Born out of his own curiosity for what his government hid from him, and fascination with the historic importance of what Spalko seeks, the crystal skull of Akator. Then, there's the skull itself, and its mysterious origin. Like so many 1950s science fiction B-movies, this is, after all, an alien movie. Whether or not they're aliens from outer space.
Interdimensional beings, in point of fact.
The mysterious and foreboding nature of the alien crystal skull makes it unclear whether it is a tool of salvation or devastation. After all, it drove Indy's friend bananas, and the malicious Soviets want it so badly for their own nefarious purposes.
A mind weapon, a new frontier of psychic warfare.
Imagine to peer across the world and know the enemy's secrets, to place our thoughts into the minds of your leaders. Make your teachers teach the true version of history. We will be everywhere at once, more powerful than a whisper, invading your dreams, thinking your thoughts for you while you sleep. You won't even know it's happening.
Plus, it is a skull with weird magic powers. It's creepy and inscrutable, seemingly something to be wary of.
What is this thing?
Indy being forced to mentally interface with the skull is framed with no small amount of trepidation. Will this fry his brain like it did Harold Oxley's?
Look what it did to him.
As it turns out, it's this connection that enables Indy to understand Oxley and the skull.
Return.
Begins to bring clarity to its secrets, and allows Indy and Oxley to find their way to the kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Why you?
Because it told me to.
The skull is an extension of the aliens, who, it is revealed, are in fact benevolent to humanity. The beings came to our Earth and shared with us their knowledge of
farming, irrigation,
aqueducts, and paved roads, and technology that wouldn't be seen again for 5,000 years.
They're even revealed to have an apparent disdain for the villains of the story.
The skull does not speak to everyone, it seems.
And as we approach the climax of Kingdom, we're struck with a new revelation. The film has taken pains throughout the adventure to highlight Dr. Jones's status as a professor of archaeology.
I'm a tenured professor of archaeology.
Oh, your teacher.
Hey, old man! Professor, hello?
Pictographs.
Ideograms.
Professor, this really is a dead end. That's some school teacher.
Maybe I will, teach.
You're gonna go back and finish school. And depending on the viscosity, it's not as dangerous as people
Oh, for Pete's sake,
think.
Jones, we're not in school.
You're a teacher?
Part-time.
Emphasizing its significance to the character and to this particular story. Even Tom Hanks' son Chet Hanks points it out.
Excuse me, Dr. Jones.
Yes?
The significance of this role increases further when it's revealed that the interdimensional beings share a key trait with Jones.
Collectors. They were archaeologists.
When Max sees the artifacts at Akator, he sees dollar signs. And while Irina is single-minded in her pursuit of truth, it's clear her interest is not for greater understanding and appreciation of humanity. She's looking for
a mind weapon.
But Indy and the aliens share a common purpose: to learn, to understand, and to teach what they've learned to others.
You've spent your entire life searching for answers. Think of the truth behind those eyes.
The crystal skull was not what it seemed. It wasn't even crystal. It was the actual skull of a still living alien creature. Its mode of life is unlike any we're familiar with, part of a sort of hive existence, physically separate, but operating as one, in an expression of perfect unity.
More powerful together than they can ever be apart.
This unity is in contrast to so much of what has come before. The paranoia, the betrayals, the misunderstandings. More than a country divided, but the entire human race divided against itself before a backdrop of something much bigger, something beyond all of us. Indy stands on the precipice of history and sees the full force of the human race's self-inflicted fury, building the potential for its own destruction, rupturing with fear, overflowing with selfish ploys at taking advantage of the panic.
Sorry, Jonesy.
We see a microcosm of this scenario as Indy stokes a relatively pointless rivalry between the jocks and the greasers at a diner, which erupts in a restaurant full of Americans pounding on each other. The overflowing outburst of violence was set off by deceit and misunderstanding, while unknowingly in their midst lurked an actual, malicious threat to all their lives and ways of life. Indy suggests a similar, if more lethal, fate befell the fellow conquistadors who plundered the skull, fighting among each other until they caused their own destruction.
They got to squabbling amongst themselves over their prize, kill each other off.
It's a dark and unfortunate perspective of humanity that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull presents. The film demonstrates the irony and tragedy of people turning against each other as a result of the larger conflicts and the growing existential threat to all.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
But even within this bleak analysis, the story provides hope. Throughout the movie, progress to the cosmic goal was made by working together. Marion with the gang, Indy and Mutt, Indy and Oxley,
Return.
Indy and the Russians, even Indy and the Skull. The first time on his quest, Oxley wasn't able to return the skull by himself.
Ox was here before, but he couldn't get into the temple.
You figured this out in yourself, didn't you, Professor?
He required the assistance of the group, and they required his.
You were here before. How did you get past them?
Show us the way, Ox.
And by the end, after addressing old wounds and reaching understanding,
didn't you ever wonder years ago why Ox stopped talking to you? He hated that you ran away.
You two just stop.
Let's not let the kids see Mom and Dad fight.
You're not my dad, okay?
Why don't you stick around, Junior?
I don't know. Why didn't you, Dad?
Indiana Jones, Marion Ravenwood, and Mutt Williams coalesce, united as a family. While people wallow in division, the movie reinforces the importance of people working together.
Go get help.
Help.
Help! 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 She said you'd help me.
You want my help?
Help us.
Well, you know me. Always glad to help.
That we could achieve something greater together than we ever could alone, climaxing in a spectacular showcase of what is possible when people operate together for the good of all through the reveal of the interdimensional higher beings who are predicated on the ideas of unity, progress, knowledge, advancement, and possibility. Like the aliens of the 1950s science fiction classic, The Day the Earth Stood Still, any threat they pose to us is really self-inflicted. They offer us a challenge by way of a warning and a glimpse of a better future we can hope and strive for, even as the movies acknowledge that we're currently on the brink of destroying ourselves. Because this persisting hope, according to Bill Warren, is also an element of the 1950s science fiction B-movie. He said, "These movies were made in a culture that looked toward the future. Yes, there was a constant underlying fear of nuclear annihilation, but barring that, people knew their children would grow up in a better world than they did. Most writers detect Cold War anxiety permeating many of these films, and it is there. But the overall tone is optimistic. The world isn't completely destroyed, the aliens don't take over, the monsters are vanquished. As the movie reaches a close, Indy again stands on the precipice of history, watching the spectacular new development unfold before him. The movie visually comes full circle as this moment parallels the earlier scene of Indy witnessing the horror and magnitude of calamity and disaster that humanity is capable of inflicting upon itself. At the end of this journey, he now witnesses the inverse of that, the hope of a future of unity and progress, of possibilities beyond imagination, a future opposite our present, a future which, unfortunately, Indy and the film acknowledge that we are nowhere near ready for.
Imagine what they could tell us.
I can't imagine. Neither could the humans that built this temple, and neither can you.
But it is also a future we should continue to strive for nonetheless. And the movie tells us how.
Perhaps we're all searching for the same thing.
By pursuing the treasure the adventurers were, inadvertently, searching for the whole time. The riches the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was founded upon.
It was knowledge. Knowledge was their treasure.
Not the lies, the deceit, the misinformation Spalko sought to spread with the skull. Not the suspicion and fear-mongering amuck in the United States.
What?
Not the selfishness and greed of Mac. Uncertainty can breed rampant fear, distrust, and panic. Misunderstanding can turn people against each other, people who might otherwise have a shared goal. But knowledge can bring clarity and unity where there previously was uncertainty and misunderstanding. It's a simple key to a fantastical dream, but as challenging as it is powerful.
To lay their just hands on that golden key that opens the palace of eternity.
Knowledge is the future. Knowledge is progress. Knowledge is understanding. Knowledge is gained through collaboration as we work together. Knowledge is the treasure we all need to be looking for, to continue looking for, in our personal journeys of life and in our journey as a society, as a people, as a human race. There was a point in this movie where Indy thought he didn't belong in this time anymore, that he no longer fit in this new world. But here, he finds an aspect of himself that he's carried since before the 30s, that is still as vital as ever in this more modern era. Indiana Jones stood on the precipice of history and saw two possible futures: a cold, malignant path to division and destruction, and a gateway to unity, progress, and infinite possibility, founded on the treasure of the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. A distant future we can search for, letting its light cut through the dark deception and murkiness of our present. If, like Indiana Jones, our pursuit is to learn and understand, to teach, to share, and to grow. Thanks for watching. I hope you found it interesting. If, like me, you're also a fan of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, that's another series I love talking about on the So Much to Tell Sam Raimi Spider-Man podcast. You can find me there. And I'd be interested to hear more of your thoughts on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because like so many great stories, I continue to find new interpretations of it and get more and more out of it. Well, until next time, I'm Peter Witechko, and I hope you find your treasure.